1. Jodi Arias, the jealous bride of blood. Some women dream of white dresses and wedding bells. Others fantasize about something darker. Jodi Arias spent her days photographing other people's perfect moments, capturing smiles and celebrations through her camera lens. But behind her own smile lay a mind that confused obsession with love, possession with devotion. Travis Alexander thought he understood women, a motivational speaker who inspired others to chase their dreams. He had charm, ambition, and the kind of confidence that drew people into his orbit. When he met Jodi at a company conference in Las Vegas, he saw an attractive photographer who seemed interested in his world. What he couldn't see was a storm brewing behind her eager eyes. Their relationship began like a whirlwind romance. Jodi moved from California to Arizona just to be closer to Travis, rearranging her entire life around a man she barely knew. She converted to his Mormon faith, attended his church, and integrated herself into every corner of his existence. Friends watched her transformation with growing unease, noticing how she seemed to lose herself in becoming what she thought Travis wanted. But Travis was growing tired of the intensity. He wanted space to date other women, to explore relationships without Jodi's constant presence shadowing his every move. He tried to establish boundaries, to create distance between them, to make it clear that their future lay in different directions. Each attempt to pull away only tightened Jodi's grip on what she considered hers by right. The breaking point came when Travis planned a trip to Cancun with another woman. For Jodi, this wasn't just rejection. It was betrayal of the highest order. She had given up everything for this man, reorganized her faith and her future around him. And now, he was choosing someone else with a romantic getaway that should have been theirs. On June 4, 2008, Jodi drove from California to Travis's home in Mesa, Arizona. She told police later that she had never been there that day, that she was hundreds of miles away when Travis died. But her camera told a different story. In the moments before his death, Travis was photographed in his shower, unaware that his life was about to end in the most violent way imaginable. What happened in that bathroom represents a level of rage that goes beyond ordinary jealousy into territory that defies rational explanation. Jodi didn't just kill Travis. She obliterated him. 27 stab wounds covered his body, each one representing another second of fury, another moment of revenge for perceived slights and imagined betrayals. One wound sliced so deep into his throat that it nearly severed his head from his neck. But even 27 stab wounds weren't enough to satisfy her rage. Even watching Travis collapse and bleed across his bathroom floor didn't calm the storm inside her mind. She shot him in the head with a .25 caliber pistol, the bullet lodging in his skull as he lay dying from wounds that would have killed most people several times over. The crime scene looked like something from a horror movie. Blood spattered the walls and pooled on the floor, where Travis had tried to crawl away from his attacker. His body bore defensive wounds, showing he had fought desperately for his life, trying to protect himself from the woman he had once cared about, the woman who was now determined to destroy him completely. After the slaughter, Jodi tried to clean up the evidence, washing blood from her hands and the walls before loading Travis's body into a shower and leaving him there to be discovered days later. She threw the camera into the washing machine, not realizing that digital images could be recovered even from damaged memory cards. Then she drove back to California and waited for someone else to find what she had done. When police questioned her about Travis's murder, Jodi's story changed multiple times. First, she claimed she hadn't been in Arizona at all. Then she admitted to being there, but said masked intruders had killed Travis while she hid in a closet, too terrified to help him. Finally, she claimed self-defense, saying Travis had become violent and she had killed him to protect herself. The trial became a media sensation, with Jodi representing herself for portions of the proceedings and cross-examining witnesses with the same intensity she had brought to stalking Travis. She drew diagrams of the crime scene, questioned experts about blood spatter patterns, and maintained her innocence even as overwhelming evidence proved her guilt. On May 8, 2013, after deliberating for 15 hours, the jury found Jodi Arias guilty of first-degree murder. The same jury that convicted her could not reach a unanimous decision on her sentence, resulting in a mistrial during the penalty phase. A second jury also deadlocked on whether she should receive life in prison or execution, ultimately resulting in a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Jodi now spends her days in a small cell at the Arizona State Prison complex in Perryville, where she will remain until she dies. At 34 years old when sentenced, she faces decades of imprisonment for a crime that shocked even experienced investigators with its brutality. The woman who once dreamed of becoming Mrs. Travis Alexander instead became one of the most notorious killers in modern American history. 2. Shayna Hubers, the bride who wouldn't let go. Every law student learns about reasonable doubt, about the burden of proof, about how the justice system protects the innocent. But what happens when a person manipulating that system understands it better than most? Shayna Hubers knew exactly how investigations worked, how evidence was collected, how prosecutors built their cases. She had watched it happen countless times from the other side, dating a successful attorney who brought his work home with him. Ryan Poston had everything going for him at 29 years old. His law practice was thriving. His Highland Heights condominium overlooked the Cincinnati skyline, and his future seemed limitless. He was the kind of man who attracted attention wherever he went, confident in his abilities and comfortable in his success. When he started dating Shayna, friends thought they made an attractive couple. The successful attorney and the psychology student who seemed to understand him. But understanding and obsession can look remarkably similar from the outside. Shayna didn't just date Ryan, she consumed him. She appeared at his office unannounced, showed up at events where she hadn't been invited, and inserted herself into conversations with his friends and colleagues. She talked about their future together as if it had already been decided, referring to herself as the future Mrs. Poston to anyone who would listen. Ryan began to feel suffocated by her constant presence. He was a successful attorney used to controlling his own schedule, his own space, his own decisions. Shayna's increasing demands for attention and commitment felt like chains around his neck, restricting his freedom to live the life he had worked so hard to build. He started making excuses to avoid seeing her, declined invitations where she might appear, and began dating other women. The psychology student in Shayna recognized the signs of a relationship ending. She could read Ryan's body language, interpret his growing distance, understand that her vision of their future together was crumbling. But instead of accepting reality, she decided to rewrite it. If Ryan wouldn't choose to stay with her willingly, she would make sure he had no choice at all. October 12, 2012, started like any other Friday evening in Highland Heights. Ryan was getting ready for a date with another woman, someone who didn't demand constant attention or plan their wedding after 3 months of dating. He had finally gathered the courage to end things with Shayna definitively, to make it clear that their relationship was over and she needed to move on with her life. When Shayna arrived at his condominium that evening, Ryan thought it would be their final conversation as a couple. He planned to be gentle but firm, to explain that they weren't compatible for the long term, that they both deserved to find happiness with other people. He had no idea that Shayna had already decided how this conversation would end. The argument that followed revealed the depth of Shayna's rage at being rejected. She screamed at Ryan about the other women he was dating, accused him of using her, demanded explanations for why their relationship wasn't enough for him. But Ryan held his ground, making it clear that their romantic involvement was over regardless of her protests. What happened next shows how quickly obsession can transform into violence. Shayna pulled out a gun and shot Ryan 6 times, continuing to fire even after he had fallen to the floor. She didn't shoot him once in a moment of rage and immediately regret her actions. She shot him repeatedly, deliberately, ensuring that the man who had rejected her could never reject anyone again. But Shayna's knowledge of the legal system extended beyond just pulling the trigger. She immediately called 911, her voice shaking with what sounded like shock and fear. She told the operator that she had killed Ryan in self-defense, that he had attacked her, and she had shot him to protect herself. She knew exactly what words to use, what details to emphasize, how to frame the narrative in her favor. When police arrived, they found Ryan's body on his living room floor and Shayna covered in his blood, still holding the gun. She maintained her self-defense story, claiming that Ryan had become violent when she tried to leave him, that she had shot him only after he threatened to kill her. She even claimed that she was doing him a favor, saying that she had given him a nose job because he had always been self-conscious about his appearance. The investigation quickly revealed the flaws in Shayna's story. Ryan had been shot 6 times, with wounds to his face, chest, and back that were inconsistent with self-defense. The trajectory of the bullet showed that he had been shot while trying to get away from her, not while attacking her. Phone records revealed her obsessive behavior in the weeks before the murder, including dozens of calls and text messages that Ryan had stopped answering. During her trial, Shayna represented herself with the same intensity she had brought to stalking Ryan. She cross-examined witnesses, objected to evidence, and maintained her innocence with the confidence of someone who understood courtroom procedure. She even laughed during testimony about Ryan's death, showing a callousness that shocked even experienced court observers. The prosecution presented evidence of Shayna's escalating obsession with Ryan, her threats when he tried to end their relationship, and the premeditation evident in her bringing a gun to what she claimed was supposed to be a peaceful conversation. They showed that this wasn't self-defense but execution, carried out by a woman who couldn't accept that the man she wanted didn't want her back. On April 23, 2015, Shayna Hubers was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. However, her conviction was overturned on appeal due to a juror issue, leading to a second trial in 2018, where she was again convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment. She was 24 years old when she killed Ryan, throwing away both of their futures in a moment of rage. Today, Shayna sits in her cell at the Kentucky Correctional Institution for Women, where she continues to maintain her innocence despite overwhelming evidence of her guilt. The woman who once planned to become a successful attorney's wife instead became a cautionary tale about what happens when obsession replaces love, when possession becomes more important than the person being possessed. 3. Linn Graham, the Cliffside Bride. Most brides count down the days to their wedding with excitement and anticipation. Jodi Graham counted down with dread. As her wedding date approached, doubt consumed her thoughts like poison spreading through her veins. She had said yes to Cody's proposal during a moment of weakness, caught up in the romance of the gesture rather than the reality of spending her life with him. The ceremony itself felt like a performance she was watching from outside her own body. She spoke the vows, smiled for photographs, and danced at the reception while screaming silently inside her mind. Each congratulations from well-wishers felt like another nail in the coffin of her freedom, another reminder that she had trapped herself in a life she didn't want with a man she wasn't sure she loved. Cody Johnson was everything a woman was supposed to want in a husband. He was kind, stable, employed, and devoted to her in a way that made other women jealous. He talked about their future with genuine excitement, planning trips they would take and children they would have. But his very devotion felt suffocating to Jodi, like a heavy blanket she couldn't throw off no matter how hard she struggled. The honeymoon period that should have been the happiest time of their lives instead became 8 days of mounting claustrophobia. Every loving gesture from Cody felt like another chain binding her to a decision she regretted more with each passing hour. When he talked about their future, she heard only the sound of doors slamming shut on possibilities she would never explore. By their 8th day of marriage, Jodi had reached a breaking point that demanded resolution. She couldn't continue pretending to be happy, couldn't keep playing the role of a contented newlywed when every fiber of her being was screaming for escape. But divorce seemed impossible so soon after the wedding, too embarrassing to explain to family and friends who had just celebrated their union. That's when she suggested they go hiking in Glacier National Park. Cody loved the outdoors, loved spending time with her in natural settings where they could talk and connect away from the distractions of daily life. He eagerly agreed to the excursion, seeing it as an opportunity to grow closer to his new wife, to share an adventure that would become a treasured memory of their early marriage. The Loop Trail in Glacier National Park winds along dramatic cliff faces that drop hundreds of feet into rocky chasms below. It's the kind of scenery that takes your breath away with its beauty and danger, where one careless step can mean the difference between a memorable hike and a fatal fall. Jodi led Cody along the narrow path, her mind racing with thoughts she couldn't share with the man walking trustingly beside her. When they reached a particularly treacherous section of the trail, Jodi made her choice. She didn't push Cody with obvious violence or dramatic struggle. Instead, she used his trust against him, encouraging him to stand closer to the edge to get a better view of the valley below. When he turned his back to her, comfortable in the presence of his loving wife, she placed her hands on his back and pushed. Cody fell 200 feet down the mountainside, his body bouncing off rocks and ledges before coming to rest at the bottom of the ravine. Jordan watched him fall, watched him disappear into the darkness below, watched her 8-day marriage end in the most final way possible. Then she climbed back down the trail alone, already preparing the story she would tell about her husband's tragic accident. When Jordan returned home without Cody, she told friends and family that he had gone for a hike alone and hadn't returned. She played the role of the worried newlywed wife, organizing search parties and pleaded with authorities to find her missing husband. She even sent herself text messages from Cody's phone to make it appear that he had left her, creating evidence of marital problems that might explain his disappearance. The search for Cody lasted for days, with volunteers combing the mountainous terrain, looking for any sign of the missing man. Jordan participated in the searches, calling his name and appearing distraught when he couldn't be found. But investigators began to notice inconsistencies in her story, details that didn't align with her claims about when and where she had last seen her husband. When Cody's body was finally discovered at the bottom of the ravine, the location didn't match Jordan's account of where he had been hiking. The positioning of his body and the nature of his injuries suggested that he had fallen from the exact section of trail where Jordan claimed they had never been together. Phone records and witness statements further contradicted her version of events. Under mounting pressure from investigators, Jordan's story began to change. She admitted that she and Cody had hiked together on the day he died, but claimed his fall had been an accident that she was too frightened to report. She said she had panicked after watching him fall, running home instead of calling for help because she was scared people would blame her for his death. But the evidence suggested something far more sinister than panic after a tragic accident. The force required to send Cody over the cliff edge, combined with his position at the time of his fall, indicated that he had been pushed rather than simply lost his footing. Jordan's attempt to create false evidence of marital problems showed premeditation rather than the spontaneous panic she claimed to have experienced. On March 27, 2014, Jordan Linn Graham pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in federal court, admitting that she had pushed her husband off the cliff during an argument about their marriage. She was sentenced to 30 years and 4 months in federal prison, meaning she will be in her 50s before she has any chance of freedom again. At 22 years old when she killed Cody, Jordan threw away not just her husband's life, but her own future as well. The woman who couldn't face the embarrassment of a quick divorce instead faces decades in prison for choosing murder as her solution to marital unhappiness. She now spends her days in a federal correctional facility, surrounded by concrete walls instead of the Montana wilderness, where she ended 2 lives with one push. For Amanda Hayes, the bride of betrayal, some women kill for passion, others for money, but the most dangerous kill for competition. Amanda Hayes looked at Grant's ex-girlfriend Laura and saw everything she feared losing: the attention of a man, the security of a relationship, the promise of a future together. In her mind, there wasn't room for both of them in Grant's life, and she intended to make sure only one would survive to claim him. Grant Hayes seemed like a catch to most women who knew him. He had steady employment, his own place, and the kind of charm that made conversations flow easily. When he started dating Amanda, she felt like she had won a prize that other women wanted for themselves. The problem was that Grant's past wasn't as buried as Amanda preferred, and Laura Ackerson kept reminding her that fact. Laura wasn't trying to win Grant back or interfere in his new relationship. She was simply trying to maintain a connection to her children, the 2 boys she had shared with Grant during their tumultuous relationship years earlier. Court-ordered visitation meant that Laura would always be part of Grant's life in some capacity, a reality that drove Amanda to distraction with jealousy and paranoia. Every phone call between Grant and Laura about the children felt like a threat to Amanda's security. Every pickup and drop-off for visitation reminded her that another woman had a permanent claim on the man she was planning to marry. She watched Grant's face during these interactions, searching for signs he still harbored feelings for the mother of his children, convinced that their upcoming marriage would always be shadowed by Laura's presence. The custody battle between Grant and Laura had grown increasingly hostile over the months leading up to Laura's disappearance. Both parents wanted primary custody of the boys, and both were willing to fight dirty to get it. Amanda inserted herself into these disputes, taking Grant's side with fervor that surprised even him with its intensity. She saw Laura not just as an obstacle to her happiness, but as an enemy who needed to be defeated. On July 13, 2011, Laura arrived at Grant and Amanda's apartment for what she thought was a normal custody exchange. She had come to pick up the boys for her scheduled time with them, expecting nothing more than the usual awkward conversation with her ex and his fiancée. She had no way of knowing that Amanda had been planning this moment for weeks, that her arrival would trigger a sequence of events that had been carefully orchestrated to end her life. What happened inside that apartment represents a level of viciousness that goes beyond ordinary domestic violence in the territory that still haunts investigators years later. Amanda and Grant didn't just kill Laura quickly and dispose of her body. Instead, they tortured her for hours, inflicting pain and terror on a woman whose only crime was sharing children with a man who had moved on to someone else. They bound Laura with duct tape, ensuring she couldn't escape or defend herself from what was coming next. Then they began a systematic assault that lasted for hours, taking turns inflicting pain and humiliation on someone who was completely at their mercy. Amanda participated actively in the torture, her jealousy and rage finally finding an outlet in the screams of the woman she saw as her rival. When they finally decided that Laura had suffered enough, they strangled her to death, watching the life leave her eyes as payment for the crime of existing in their lives. But their cruelty didn't end with her death. They dismembered her body, cutting her into pieces that would be easier to transport and dispose of, showing a level of disrespect for human life that shocked even experienced law enforcement officers. The disposal of Laura's remains showed the same calculating cruelty they had displayed during her murder. They didn't just dump her body in a remote location and hope it would never be found. Instead, they scattered her remains across multiple states, ensuring that even in death, Laura would be fragmented and incomplete, denied the dignity of a proper burial by the people who had taken everything else from her. Amanda's wedding to Grant took place just weeks after they murdered Laura, the ceremony proceeding as planned despite the fact that they had tortured and killed the mother of his children. She walked down the aisle in a white dress, exchanging vows with a man who had helped her commit one of the most vicious murders in North Carolina history, celebrating their union, while Laura's family searched desperately for any trace of her. The investigation into Laura's disappearance quickly focused on Grant and Amanda, whose stories about the last time they had seen her kept changing with each interview. Physical evidence found in their apartment contradicted their claims, and witness testimony placed Laura at their residence around the time she vanished. When pieces of her body were discovered in different states, DNA evidence linked both Grant and Amanda to her murder. During the trial, prosecutors presented evidence of prolonged torture Laura had endured, the dismemberment of her body, and Amanda's active participation in every aspect of the crime. They showed that this wasn't a spontaneous act of violence, but a carefully planned murder motivated by jealousy and the desire to eliminate someone Amanda saw as competition for Grant's attention. Amanda's defense team tried to argue that Grant had been the primary perpetrator, that she had been coerced into participating in crimes she wouldn't have committed on her own. They painted her as another victim, someone who had been manipulated by an abusive partner into behavior that went against her nature. But the evidence showed equal participation, equal cruelty, equal responsibility for Laura's suffering and death. On February 25, 2014, Amanda Hayes was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She was 26 years old when she received her sentence, meaning she will spend the rest of her life behind bars for choosing murder as a solution to romantic jealousy. Her dream of becoming Mrs. Grant Hayes ended not with a honeymoon, but with a life sentence for one of the most vicious crimes in recent memory. 5. Kelly Cochran, the Bride of Death Pact. Marriage contracts usually involve promises of fidelity, devotion, and mutual support. Kelly Cochran's marriage contract included a murder clause. She and her husband Jason crafted an agreement that read like something from a psychological thriller, complete with detailed provisions about what would happen if either spouse strayed from their union. The pact they signed wasn't witnessed by a notary or blessed by any church. It was sealed in private. Two minds twisted enough to believe that love could be measured in blood, that commitment meant being willing to kill for your partner. Their wedding vows may have sounded traditional to the guests who attended their ceremony, but the real promises they made to each other were written in invisible ink that would only be revealed when passion turned to murder. Chris Reagan thought he was just having an affair with a married woman, The Michigan auto parts store manager had been seeing Kelly for months, sneaking around behind Jason's back, believing he was the one taking advantage of the situation. What he didn't understand was that he had become a pawn in a game much deadlier than adultery, a game where the rules were written by two people who had already decided his fate. The murder pact between Kelly and Jason was simple in its twisted logic. If either spouse cheated, the betrayed partner had the right to eliminate the third party. It wasn't jealousy that drove this agreement. It was something far more calculating. They had turned marriage into a blood sport, where infidelity carried a death sentence that would be carried out with surgical precision. Jason knew about Kelly's relationship with Chris from the beginning. He hadn't tried to stop it, hadn't confronted either of them, hadn't demanded a divorce or separation. Instead, he had watched and waited, letting the affair continue until the perfect moment arrived. The moment when their contract would require him to act, when love would demand murder. On October 14th, 2014, Kelly lured Chris to their home under the pretense of spending time together while Jason was away. She had done this many times before, bringing her lover into the very bed she shared with her husband, creating memories that would soon be erased forever. But this time was different. This time, Jason was waiting. What happened inside the house represents the ultimate perversion of marriage vows. While Kelly watched, Jason emerged from his hiding place and attacked Chris with a .22 caliber handgun. The man who thought he was stealing another man's wife discovered too late that he had walked into an execution chamber disguised as a love nest. Chris didn't die immediately. The small caliber bullet was enough to kill him instantly, leaving him wounded and conscious as Kelly and Jason discussed what to do next. They could have called an ambulance, could have claimed the shooting was an accident, could have saved the life of the man bleeding on their living room floor. Instead, they chose to finish what they had started. Jason fired again and again until Chris Reagan was dead in the home where he had expected to find passion. Kelly stood by and watched her lover die, honoring the pact she had made with her husband more than the relationship she had built with her victim. The woman who had whispered sweet words to Chris just moments earlier now helped drag his body to its final resting place. The disposal of Chris's remains showed the same cold planning that had characterized his murder. Kelly and Jason didn't panic or make mistakes that would lead investigators to them quickly. Instead, they dismembered his body with tools they had already prepared, scattering the pieces across multiple locations to ensure he would never be found whole. Kelly continued her normal routine after the murder, going to work and socializing with friends as if nothing had happened. When people asked where Chris was, she expressed concern about his disappearance, even helping organize search efforts. She played the role of the worried lover, while knowing exactly where every piece of him was buried. The investigation into Chris's disappearance eventually focused on Kelly, whose story about their last meeting kept changing with each interview. When confronted with evidence linking her to his death, she initially tried to blame everything on Jason, claiming she had been forced to participate against her will. But the murder pact they had signed told a different story. This wasn't a case of domestic violence or coercion. This was a partnership in murder. Two people who had agreed beforehand that adultery deserved death and had the commitment to carry out their twisted sentence. Kelly was sentenced to 65 years in prison for a role in Chris Reagan's murder. But her story didn't end there. Investigators soon connected her to another death, her husband Jason, who died under suspicious circumstances after Chris's murder. The woman who had honored her marriage contract by killing her lover may have decided that her partner in murder had outlived his usefulness as well. 6. Molly Martens Corbett, the bride of silent rage. Some people move across ocean for love. Molly Martens traveled from Tennessee to Ireland and back again, following her heart straight into a marriage that would end with her standing over her husband's lifeless body, holding the weapon that had taken his life. The fairy tale began when she answered an advertisement to become a nanny for Jason Corbett's children. The Irish businessman needed help caring for his two young kids after his first wife died, and Molly seemed like the perfect solution. Young, enthusiastic, and willing to relocate to a foreign country to help a grieving family rebuild their lives. Jason was everything American women fantasize about in foreign men. He had an Irish accent that made ordinary conversations sound like poetry, successful business ventures that provided financial security, and a devotion to his children that showed his capacity for deep love. When he and Molly began dating, It felt like something from a romance novel. Their courtship bloomed in the Irish countryside, where Molly helped raise Jason's son and daughter while slowly becoming more than just their caregiver. She integrated herself into their daily routines, their family traditions, and eventually into Jason's heart. When he proposed, she said yes to a future that seemed perfect in every possible way. The couple married in a ceremony that blended Irish traditions with American touches, celebrating their union with friends and family from both sides of the Atlantic. But their honeymoon period would be brief. Financial pressures and custody issues began straining their relationship almost immediately after they exchanged vows. Jason's family in Ireland began expressing concerns about Molly's control over the children and her influence on Jason's decisions. They worried that she was isolating him from his Irish roots, turning him against people who'd been part of his life long before she arrived. The cultural differences that had seemed charming during their courtship began creating serious friction in their marriage. When Jason decided to move his family to North Carolina to give Molly a chance to be closer to her own family, it seemed like a reasonable compromise. But the relocation only intensified the problems in their relationship. Away from his familiar support system, Jason became increasingly dependent on Molly, while simultaneously growing resentful of that dependence. The night of August 2nd, 2015, began with another argument about their future together. Jason wanted to return to Ireland with the children, believing that Molly had become too controlling, and that his kids needed to maintain their connection to their Irish heritage. Molly saw this as abandonment, a betrayal of everything she had sacrificed to build their life together. What happened next in their North Carolina bedroom represents the violent end of what started as a transatlantic love story. As Jason slept, Molly and her father Tom entered the room carrying a baseball bat and a paving stone. They attacked the sleeping man with these weapons, striking him repeatedly until he died from massive head trauma. The scene they created was meant to look like a home invasion gone wrong. Molly called 911, reporting that intruders had broken into their house and attacked her husband while she and her father tried unsuccessfully to save him. She told responding officers that Jason had been killed by strangers who had fled before police arrived. But investigators quickly found problems with Molly's story. The crime scene didn't match her account of what had happened. The injuries on Jason's body were inconsistent with her version of events, and physical evidence contradicted key details of her statement. Her father's presence in the house at the time of the attack also raised suspicions about their involvement. The investigation revealed a pattern of escalating conflict between Molly and Jason in the weeks before his death. Friends and family members testified about arguments they had witnessed, threats that had been made, and fears that Jason had expressed about his safety. The fairy tale marriage had become a nightmare long before it ended in murder. During the trial, prosecutors presented evidence that Molly and her father had planned Jason's murder and staged the scene to look like a random home invasion. They showed that financial motivations and custody concerns had driven Molly to see murder as the only way to maintain control over the children and the life she had built in America. Molly's defense team argued that she had killed Jason in self-defense, claiming that he had become physically abusive and that she had acted to protect herself and her father from his violence. They painted Jason as a man whose charm masked a dangerous temper, someone who had threatened their safety and forced them to act in their own defense. On August 9, 2017, Molly Martens Corbett and her father were both convicted of second-degree murder for killing Jason Corbett. She was sentenced to 20 to 25 years in prison for her role in the death of the man she had once promised to love and honor for the rest of their lives. The woman who had crossed an ocean to find love instead found herself locked away in an American prison, separated permanently from the children she had helped raise and the life she had tried so desperately to control through violence. 7. Shayanna Jenkins-Hernandez. The loyal bride of the killer. Most women become famous for their own achievements. Shayanna Jenkins became famous for standing by a man whose achievements were overshadowed by the murders he committed while she planned their wedding. Aaron Hernandez was everything a young woman from Bristol, Connecticut could want in a partner. He was a professional football player for the New England Patriots, making millions of dollars and living the kind of life that most people only see on television. When he chose Shayanna to share that life with him, she thought she had won the ultimate prize. Their relationship began in high school, long before Aaron's NFL career transformed him into a celebrity. Shayanna had known him when he was just another talented athlete with big dreams, and she stayed with him as those dreams became reality. Their connection was built on years of shared history, mutual support through challenges, and plans for a future together. When Aaron proposed, Shayanna felt like she was living in a fairy tale. She would become the wife of a professional athlete, the mother of his children, and the mistress of a lifestyle that included luxury cars, expensive homes, and all the privileges that come with fame and fortune. She began planning their wedding with the enthusiasm of someone who believed her happy ending had arrived. But Aaron was living a double life that Shayanna either didn't see or chose to ignore. While she planned their wedding, he was involving himself in violent confrontations that would eventually destroy everything they had built together. The man she knew as her loving fiancé was becoming someone else entirely when he left their home. The night Odin Lloyd died, Shayanna was at home with her daughter, unaware that her fiancé was orchestrating a murder that would unravel their entire world. When Aaron returned in the early morning hours, she noticed nothing unusual about his behavior, nothing that suggested he had just participated in taking another person's life. In the days following Lloyd's murder, Shayanna began noticing changes in Aaron's behavior that she couldn't explain. He was nervous, agitated, and secretive in ways that were unusual even for someone who had always been private about certain aspects of his life. He asked her to do things that seemed strange at the time, but would later be revealed as efforts to destroy evidence. The most damaging request came when Aaron asked Shayanna to remove a box from their basement and dispose of it without looking inside. She agreed, taking the box from their home and throwing it away in a dumpster, believing she was helping her fiancé with some minor issue that he preferred to handle privately. When investigators discovered that the box had contained evidence related to Lloyd's murder, Shayanna found herself facing legal charges for a role in helping Aaron cover up his crime. The woman who had been planning her wedding suddenly needed to plan her legal defense instead. The investigation revealed that Shayanna had lied to a grand jury about her knowledge of Aaron's activities and her role in disposing of evidence. Prosecutors argued that she had willfully obstructed their investigation by destroying materials that could have helped convict her fiancé more quickly. Shayanna maintained that she had no knowledge of what was in the box she disposed of, that Aaron had asked her to get rid of it without explaining why, and that she believed she was helping him with something innocuous. She claimed that her only crime was trusting the man she loved and following his instructions without asking questions. The trial became a media spectacle, with cameras following Shayanna as she entered and left courthouse, reporters analyzing every expression on her face, and commentators debating whether she was a victim or an accomplice. Her wedding dress hung and used in her closet, while she fought to avoid prison time for helping the man she had planned to marry. The jury struggled with Shayanna's case, ultimately finding it difficult to determine whether she had knowingly participated in a cover-up or had been manipulated by Aaron into unwittingly destroying evidence. The charges against her were eventually dropped, but her reputation had been permanently damaged by her association with the case. Aaron was convicted of Lloyd's murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He committed suicide in his prison cell before their planned wedding could take place, leaving Shayanna to raise her daughter alone while dealing with the aftermath of his crimes. Today, Shayanna lives quietly with her daughter, trying to build a new life away from the spotlight that had once seemed so appealing. The woman who had planned to become Mrs. Aaron Hernandez instead became a cautionary tale about the dangers of loving someone whose public persona masks a much darker reality.